We're still in Pasuk Gimel Halacha Aleph, and as I had mentioned last time, there's almost like no discussion of Oila Shulchan Melachim except in this halacha. A little bit kind of, Oila Shulchan Melachim means that for foods only require Bishul Yisroel if they are, one rule is they have to be not edible raw, and second is they have to be Oila Shulchan Melachim, served at a king's table. Okay, only foods that are more sophisticated are the foods in Bishul Yisroel.
So we're not talking about potatoes, we're talking about fish.
Well, we're going to talk about today what we mean by Oila Shulchan. That's exactly what we're here to talk about. Okay, and what's
that's what would you say? The concept
is that it's a fancier food.
So there wouldn't be potatoes. That would be below the dignity of a king.
We're going to talk exactly about that,
okay.
or almost exactly about that. Okay. Now, what's to me is a surprise is that until 20 years ago, we don't see any discussion in the poskim what to explain what does it mean to Shulchan Melachim. There's one very critical question, which to us seems like an obvious question, and until I don't know how many years ago, no one talked about this question. It was as if it was obvious one of the ways. Okay, and obviously everyone thinks it's obvious. The question is like this: when we say that it has to be Oila Shulchan Melachim, and it has to be fit for a king, does that mean when the king is serving a royal dinner? Meaning when the president of France comes, that's what I serve to him. That I serve him. He's now having an official royal meeting together, or does it mean is what the guy eats ever in his house? Right. What does he eat? Does he eat when he eats? Do kings not eat certain foods? Okay. And to me, that seems like a very. I guess maybe because I've heard the Shiloh, it seems to make a very important and clear question. And yet, we don't see anybody talking about it until really very contemporary poskim will talk about this question. You don't see anybody talking about it long ago, and I don't know why. We'll try to talk a little bit about it. And there was a story that came up recently. I forgot who sent it around. That brought out the point. Okay, it brought out the point for what it was missing. David, so because like this, there was a story said that they asked Rabbi Yashiv whether potato chips need Bishul Yisroel, and his answer, supposedly back, was, well, go find out whether President Obama eats potato chips. Okay, and the people who were saying the story over were saying it over to try. They were like picking up on the fact that he was using Obama as an example of a king. Okay, which it is. The word Shulchan Melachim doesn't mean the guy has to have the formality of a king, with a crown on his head. It means he's a person and leader. So they called it then a melech, and Obama, of course, qualifies as a leader. He only eats certain things. But what they forgot to ask him, or what they didn't. So what the problem is, what they didn't ask, or they forgot to tell us what they asked, was the question. The more important question is what he said is, what does Obama eat? Does he mean is when Obama has a state dinner, does he serve it? And of course we would say, of course he doesn't serve potato chips, right? They don't serve potato chips at a state dinner. Or does it mean is when he's sitting around watching a Bears game, does he eat potato chips? And he might. I mean, so that's a whole different question. They forgot. And the point was they should have asked Rabbi Yashiv what he meant to say. I don't care whether Obama eats potato chips. The question is whether that was the point. Is it doesn't mean anything. Obama is considered the melech. To us, that's obvious. The Shiloh is really this is the more important question: is when you want us to know whether Obama eats it? Should we ask him if he serves it when Netanyahu comes to visit him, or should we ask him if he serves it when they're sitting in the backyard? Okay, that's for us the more important question.
Email. Why is a question on potato chips in the first place?
I don't know why someone asking the question. I don't even know if the story is true.
No, but
it's legend.
Theoretically,
yeah.
Why would we ask on potato chips if it's Bishul Yisroel as opposed to any other kind of
why did so? That's because that's what some guy asked him. Some guy just met him in the street and asked him this question. We have no. It's just.
Yes.
That's what I said. This is need potato chips. This is need Bishul Yisroel. So, okay. Another example, which someone asked me about this week, is they had roasted. I don't know if that's the right word. Broiled. I don't know if that's the right. What is the corn on the cob? Okay, not cooked in a pot, not cooked in a microwave, cooked just over the fire. Okay, I don't know what the right word to say is. Okay, and for now, we're going to pretend that sweet corn on the cob, is not edible raw. Okay, we're going to get to that, I think, in Halcha Tezval. Whether it is or is not considered nechachai, it's a Shiloh, how to understand the shach, whether it is or not nechachai. Just put that on the side. But presuming that it's not nechachai, the question is whether that food is Oila Shulchan Melachim. Which is to say, nobody would serve if you were served at the White House, they would not serve you corn on the cob. That's not a formal food you would serve. But when the Obamas have a barbecue, they might put corn on the cob onto the barbecue. They might do that. So they might serve it. They personally might eat it, but at a function, an official function, they wouldn't serve. Okay. Now,
What happened to, just plain old corn?
corn.
I know we spoke about, different forms, different shapes and forms.
Right.
That sounds like very similar. Corn on the cob and corn off the cob.
No.
Yes, you're right. You're right. So you
fried
took,
potatoes and...
so your question is, if one is oil shulchan, if the sliced off ones is oil shulchan, maybe then it should be also even when it's still on the cob also. Okay. Is that also in a roasted form? No, the way you serve it, this is cooked right on the fire, so to speak, as opposed to cooked in water. The way you'd usually serve it, the pieces is, I think, cooked in water. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
No, it is cooked in water.
Wisconsin.
Put it in water first, and then they probably...
No, Wisconsin.
No. They just
So they roast it
you
on the
take it back. A lot of places
They
they
leave the hot scotch.
They leave the husk on.
This guy
Don't
was
tell me, man. I'm
He was
from
in Pennsylvania,
Wisconsin.
in Amish country,
He knows.
and the guys who were roasting it right on the side of the road. So he wanted to whether it was kosher altogether, but
They do it with the peel on.
But I didn't get that much detail. I didn't get that much detail. It's okay. Okay, now the first record that I know of this shiloh being asked,
Chicago.
the record of this shiloh being asked is a story. Rabbi Genak writes over in one of his farm. He writes over the story that Rav Shimon Schwab came to ask the Chazon Ish. He said to him, "Do you think that canned sardines need Bishul Yisroel?" That was the shiloh. So the Chazon Ish said, "Yes, they need Bishul Yisroel." Okay, which to us, before we go on, to us seems like the most, like one of the few halachas that it says about oil shulchan is that small fish are not considered oil shulchan. Okay, it's in here later on. So when you think of that example, that the small fish are not fancy enough to be served oil shulchan, that's like you think of sardines, right? That's what you think of in very Belsky's inimitable way that he writes. Rosh Hashanah b'tzad Nova Shalzeh. The way they put it in, okay, quoting Gemara. Yeah, the way they put them into the cans. So the shiloh, the answer is it oil shulchan? Okay, is it oil shulchan? So the Chazon Ish says, yeah, it needs Bishul Yisroel, it's oil shulchan. So Schwab said, before World War II, many Rosh Yeshiva, maybe this even started happening before World War II, he said many Rosh Yeshiva in Europe used to eat canned sardines because they held it not oil shulchan. To which the Chazon Ish didn't sort of directly answer that question. What the Chazon Ish said was, look, the King of England, this is how far I go back to this.
King Oscar.
The King of England eats sardines for breakfast. Okay, that's however he knew that, eats sardines for breakfast. So you see that's oil shulchan. Okay, so what is the Chazon Ish saying? The Chazon Ish is saying,
What about the halach that says small fish?
I don't know about that. I guess he would tell you is that nowadays, you depend on it. Nowadays the King of England eats it. So in the Shulchan Aruch, he might have said that small fish are not oil shulchan. Maybe in those days it wasn't. But if he says if nowadays the king is eats small fish, then the king eats small fish. These are not set in stone. It depends on your times.
But when a king eats sardines, just as an example, you could have a half off his popular king that he's the only one in the world that will eat sardines, and the other ones wouldn't even come in the room when he's eating them. Does that really qualify?
Maybe not. You're conjecturing that the King of England, in his example, is unusual, and you're right. I'm going to give you an example, because one of our Belsky's questions about this was, the Gemara says over a story, the Medrash says over a story that, I think it was Nebuchadnezzar, was caught eating a rabbit, a live rabbit he was eating. So Rav says, so do you think that because of that we should say that rabbits... That's another answer. But he says, and you're right, so could have one Meshug and the king eats live rabbits, we're not going to prove from that. I never said a rabbit. He said live arneves, that shouldn't prove that that it makes it, you're right. But there's no reason to think now that if the King of England eats it for breakfast, maybe the Queen eats it nowadays, and maybe Obama eats it for breakfast. I have no, there's nothing to think that it's unusual. But the Chazon Ish is saying that the only things that get excluded from oil shulchan melachim is things that are so unsophisticated, it would be like undignified for a king to eat it even in private. Okay, now that concept. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Look, the king of England, when he washes TV, eats potato chips. That's not the thing that means that he's in breakfast.
Yeah.
It's not conveniently it's being served to him, and the whatever the match, whatever comes in, right? Right?
I agree with you. We're going to get that in a second. I'm going to say, okay, I'm being more...
I'm official.
You're right.
We got to grab a bowl of Cheerios and run out.
Masking, at this point, I'm being more extreme. You're right. I'm going to come back to this in a second, but you might be right. Which is, I'm taking the extreme side, which is that the king, the only things excluded are the things that a king are so like undignified he wouldn't eat them at all. which nowadays would mean almost nothing. Because nowadays, just the world we live in, people don't have such dignity, and the king, there isn't almost anything that he wouldn't eat by himself. Doesn't exist such a thing of things that nowadays the king wouldn't eat. It used to be, that the king had more pride and he wouldn't eat. There's certain food. No, that's not for me. Like you said, like potatoes. I'm too important to eat potatoes. But nowadays it's come out no such thing of a food that a king wouldn't eat.
Can I just say one other thing? When the Lashon says Shulchan Melachim, does that mean Shulchan Melachim means when he eats his regular meals?
Okay, so we're going to get
And that's not when he's sitting in bed and watching TV.
Right. So I'm asking that. It's not clear from this story whether the Chazon Ish is limiting himself like you're two saying, and maybe it's only what he eats at a meal, and even that has a certain level of what he eats, or it means anything. Okay, we'll get back to that in a second. And the others, these unnamed Rosh Yeshiva, these others hold that Shulchan Melachim that means is when he's acting as a king, meaning when he's hosting the heads of state, when he's hosting a cabinet meeting, that's what they serve, as opposed to just what he eats by himself. Okay, that's so to speak the shiloh here. What does it mean Shulchan Melachim? Does he have to be functioning as a king then, or is he just even when he eats b'chlal? That's such a rule. Okay, now in trying to understand what this.
So there is other reason why they said this. The steam.
You're saying there might be other reasons to be mako, but that's not
why they ate sardines.
Right, so if you would have been sitting at the story, you would have said your reasons why the sardines aren't doing it. But this is the story that happened. Roshua and the Chazon Ish were having this disagreement. They didn't get into maybe it's cooked with steam and it's canned and it's not. In fact, that wasn't what we're trying to get out of the story.
Right, not really right. Yeah, it's really right for Abshrat understanding of those shit.
Yeah, that's good. Maskim. Yeah, Maskim. Okay. Now, I don't even know if we were. Well, we were not born when the story even happened. I wasn't. Okay. So now.
19.
Okay. Now the Rabbi Genak wants to say. Rabbi Genak wants to say that this question is two Tzurtzim and Tosis. It depends on two Tzurtzim and Tosis. And that's it. The two Tzurtzim and Tosis are arguing about this thing. What is that? The Tosis asks whether beer needs to be Bishul Yisroel. Okay, because you can't eat the grain raw. It's not
Where is it?
You can't eat you can't eat the grain raw, but and when it's finished, you can. So Tosis asks, does it need to be Bishul Yisroel? Tosis gives two answers. First answer is that beer is not oil Shulchan Melachim. Okay, and the second answer is that the grains are tafel to the water. We're going to see about this in Aruch base. It's considered. Yes. The main part of the drink is the liquid, and the grain is tafel to it. It's secondary. It's not important, and therefore it doesn't need Bishul Yisroel. Okay, what exactly the second answer means is for the next halacha. Okay, it's not for now. Whatever that second answer is. So Rabbi Genak is assuming that beer in those days. Rabbi Genak is assuming that beer in those days is the same as beer nowadays, and he says is that nowadays at a formal dinner you would serve wine and not beer. And the only time that Obama drinks beer in public was when he met with our esteemed policeman and etc. What he said. So they had an informal
on the lawn.
They had an informal meeting and they drank beers together. That's what Obama would drink beers together informally. Okay, but in a formal setting he wouldn't do it. Okay, and
that's true. That is so true.
So what? That's why we're waiting. We're waiting so many weeks. So that's so Rabbi Genak, and therefore Rabbi Genak, I'm saying the first Teres said it's not Ola Shulchan Melachim because that Teres holds that it has to be at the formal dinners that a king has. So therefore beer is not Ola Shulchan Melachim. The second Teres doesn't hold to that because the second Teres holds anything the king would eat by himself is also considered Ola Shulchan Melachim. And since we know that Obama drinks Bud Light now that's what he drinks. So now he drinks it also. So even at his private setting, so Mamela we can say that it's Mamela. It could say that it's. It has to find a different reason why it doesn't need Bishul Yisroel. Okay? Now, this Shiloh, but which...
You think Tosis is mutually exclusive?
No, I didn't say no. If you read Tosis, you might not say like Rabbi Genak does. Rabbi Genak. Right. If you read Tosis, it might just be two. It sounds like it's just another reason, not
as
basically
Okay. Now, it would seem that the machlokes these two sides are having has to do with how you read the Rama, because the Gemara says that the rule is if a food is not Ola Shulchan Melachim, that food does not need Bishul Yisroel. Okay, the Rambam gives an example. It's giving one of his examples.
Aleph too, right?
I don't remember. The Gemara is the Rambam is giving an example. Is giving an example of a certain food, and he said this food doesn't need Bishul Yisroel because he says it's a kind of a food that nobody would invite their friend over to eat that food. If you don't invite people over to eat that kind of a food, whatever he's describing, and therefore it doesn't need Bishul Yisroel. Okay, now that's not words from the Gemara. The Gemara said it depends on whether a king would eat it. So the Rambam is understood to be saying is, if we serve that Shulchan Melachim, that tells us that a regular person would invite somebody else over to eat it. And Memela, that's why there's a concern of chasnas. Because if my neighbor gives me a cup of water, there's no special closeness from that because he gave me the cup of water. But if he gives me something more sophisticated, he gives me a piece of meat, serves me a cooked piece of meat, that's something he would invite me over. So it causes us to have these good feelings, which could potentially lead to chasnas. Okay, so it's understood. The Rambam is sort of an extension of what the Gemara said. Okay, or an explanation. So now, the Chazon Ish is understanding that what the king eats is not really the criteria. Even though the Gemara is using those words, it depends on the Shulchan Melachim. The Shulchan Melachim is the way to tell us, it's for us to judge, it's our barometer for figuring out whether regular, average people would invite each other over for that food. Okay? So in that case, we don't need what the king would invite somebody over for. We need what the king would eat by himself is the kind of food that me and my friends would invite each other over for. And that's the real criteria. What it really depends on is what I would invite my friend over for. And the king is just a way for us to figure that out. So you could say any king, whatever he eats, even for breakfast, because we don't really care what the king eats. As opposed to the others who are learning, I would say are learning, that it really depends what the king eats. Only the king says the king would eat are those things. Whether I invite my friend over is the secondary part, and like the Gemara seems to say, it depends on the Shulchan Melachim, what the king serves. Okay, now it could be that what you were saying before, and which is what I'm coming back to, even the Chazon Ish only holds that it depends on what the king eats at a formal meal, a private meal, like you were saying. The king in the story, the king of England eats it for breakfast, even so has a certain level of sophistication to what they eat, even at a meal that's not for the public. Okay, the White House has a chef. They don't just take out a box of cornflakes and eat cornflakes for breakfast, which is one of the big things we talk about. They don't just take out a box of cornflakes. They have a chef who serves them, so there's a certain level of sophistication. So Ken said that even the Chazon Ish only meant to say that things that a king eats at a meal, like you said, Shulchan Melachim, like you said, just that's a certain level of sophistication. But what the king eats while he's watching the ball game is totally not on the radar, which would mean, at least the Chazon Ish, there are some things that'll be mutter.
Is it Shuvah from the Chazon Ish written?
No, it's just
all from...
Lots of people, other people have written Shuvah since then. In Shuvahs that I saw, but I didn't see any strong riots. Everybody just, when they say things like, they say, the Gemara says it has to be al Shulchan Melachim, and that means, of course, whichever way they think. I didn't see anybody bringing a riot. I didn't see any riot. They said, don't you see the Gemara says that it has to be Shulchan Melachim? So that means, you end the sentence however you like to. Okay? So I didn't see any good riots to what you're supposed to be doing. Okay? Anyhow, so as you likely know, most of the American hashgachas take the more lenient approach to this, and they say that to be oil Shulchan Melachim means what a king serves at a fancy dinner, what we would judge it by what we as Yankee, what he serves at a chasana, okay, and what the ladies' auxiliary serves at their brunch is not counted. Okay, that's considered an informal, less sophisticated meal, and that's not considered oil Shulchan Melachim. That's how most of the American hashgachas do. Not everybody, but most of them do. Follow that. They look at that, which is to say not like the Chazon Ish, to the point that Rabelsky even bothered him that we should include it in one of an official document that even is such a Chazon Ish. Okay? He was like, no, we don't hold like that at all. He was completely rejected. Okay? But it is. I mean, I'm telling you, there aren't strong riots in either direction. It's just everyone thinks that that's what the Gemara means. The Gemara means either like me or it means like whatever I think. That's what it means like. But I haven't seen any great riots. But we should know that Lamais is that's how most hashgachos do judge it by what people serve at when we think about pancakes and breakfast cereal.
So it's an example of a food that would be enough to me.
Pancakes are
Pancake.
a bad example.
Why pancakes are bad
I'll
example?
tell you why. Because you ever heard of a thing called crepes?
Yes.
Crepes are pancakes, but they're real thin pancakes and they're served with the malachim.
Mm-hmm.
So even though they're wrapped,
What do they serve with Melachim?
Because crepes, I don't remember, there's a name for them, a very fancy name for them. You
Is it
take
made
the
out of
grape,
eggs or?
put it on a plate, you pour some sauce on it, maybe a little dollop of cream, and that is a $75 plate. Well, nice.
Okay, so we've talked about this and we've argued about this, whether the crepes are or not Shulchan Melachim.
Like a blitz.
I'm not saying but I'm saying, yeah, like a blintz, but the fact is that you take a regular blintz, don't tell anybody it's a blintz. You pour a sauce over it, you put a dollop of sour cream or fancy cream on it, and you know,
Okay,
that's it.
so we've been back and forth about it. In our blends place, we make a Bishul Yisroel to keep people like you happy. But that's a question.
By the way, it's Chalostam.
Right, it's Chalostam. No, people eat Chalostam have to eat kosher.
Why is it
So what's an
called?
example of food?
The crepes
One
have
has breakfast cereals.
What?
Breakfast cereals
thickener.
are on, potentially. It's a question about how you should judge them.
Like Wheaties would be the breakfast of champions might be a Shiloh.
Are you serious? Of course, there's a maximum of breakfast cereal with Bishul Yisroel.
If the Melch eats it for breakfast, I don't know what Sasha Obama eats for breakfast, right? I don't know what she eats, but if that's what they serve now, he's saying is that it could be that in places like that they don't serve it. No, there's no cereal served there. So we have to know. But potentially, if no one serves it, no one serves that food. No one serves
At a dinner.
cornflakes.
You know, forget breakfast cereals are Bishul Yisroel. That's it. It's like nothing that doesn't need Bishul Yisroel. It's nothing that he wrote doesn't need Bishul Yisroel. What are you leaving out?
Okay, so that's one of the questions, if you say Chazon Ish, is that the kula has almost no application. I mean, it has almost no
Yeah, right.
application.
It'll be mocked every time you eat something.
What they would say back to you is that it used to be the kings had more dignity, and the kings would only eat. They were more limited in their diets. They didn't eat as in potatoes. That was for the hamoinam. They didn't eat such.
Maybe they don't have a Denver Melech anymore. There's a certain king you gotta look at.
Since food changed, right. So he's saying is we won't have anything to exclude from not Shulchan. So I'm saying is, in the times of the Gemara, we excluded lots of things by it, and nowadays might not. According to
So maybe anything changes, Maybe then the criteria is not Shulchan Melachim.
because.
If you get a situation where Shulchan Melachim is not so much different than Shulchan everybody, it's breakfast table, it's like a regular breakfast table.
So you're saying...
So you have to use fancy dinners
Kashrus.
because the whole thing is...
A better way to go for a bowl of cereal.
Yossi no, he doesn't mean that. He doesn't make a compromise. He says, look, really the din is it should depend on what the king eats ever, whatever the king eats. But of course, Chazal meant to exclude the things that are the less sophisticated food. They were trying to exclude certain foods. And we follow the king each king by his day. So if the king in our day would eat more food, we'd make more things also. So it becomes a point that the king eats just like everybody else does. So we have to change the din, so to speak. We have to change the criteria to make it back to only the more sophisticated foods.
Right. I mean, I think
That's what we have
that...
to
You have to describe what I'm trying to say.
What'd you say?
You actually...
Right, so really the din is that those foods should be included, should be usher, but since it got so out of hand, so to speak, and really we go by the kings in each day, but it got totally out of hand because the king has no
That's
dignity.
no class.
Right, he has no,
Don't say that. I erase that.
he didn't eat anything, so in Mamela we have to change
Like
the
in
rules.
Medina, I don't know, there's no milk or something. There's no...
Well, the Queen of England.
What a milk sir is a very shuffled type
You
person.
won't see the Queen of England eating
You go
a
to each place, so that place there's no milk, you gotta use...
Huh?
Some other criteria that
You won't see the Queen of
captures
England eating a bag of potato chips unless she's the Chedrich Hadorim and she loves potato. You would never see her in public eating potato chips. I don't believe it.
So what are you trying
What I'm
to
trying to say is that didn't Shulchan Melachim, Chazal, or Masakin, that it's talking about a state dinner, now when they eat a breakfast in the quiet room when they do it, nobody's around. When they have a meeting, and they're having a lunch meeting, they're not serving cereal and milk. They're having chef-prepared a hush of a meal for them over there. And therefore, just like there's an Indian of Nechol Chai, not Nechol Chai, but you're not going to argue on that, they say it's a state dinner, the Malachim, like Shlomo Melech, the Gemara talks about, his Shulchan, or whatever it is. But I don't want to argue on the Chazon Ish, but
so when they're acting royal,
when they're acting royal,
you're explaining what
Yeah.
they're acting royal. That's what you do.
no, you
can say Gemara means Shulchan Melachim means that at that time Melachim didn't eat certain foods, and Shulchan Melachim means, hey, you want to know the Pashut Shadi? It's like the Klinish. Shulchan Melachim means it's table. And,
broccoli during Bush's time didn't eat Bishul Yisroel.
The Senate is fighting about health care. So say the 4 or 6 senators who are fighting, who are the main ones negotiating, have been sitting locked in a room for like 2 weeks, literally.
Right.
And I said, all they're eating is junk food. Okay. So you think they eat junk food, that's because they're in private.
They're in private.
They were never
They need state
They
dinner.
consider Malachim now.
Well, it means it's the dignitaries.
They-
They're regular people in America.
So Yankee, but when they act royal, when they come to official function,
Yeah, but
that's listen.
they didn't
Okay,
know.
so that is the shita of what most American hashgachas follow. That's what you're used to, and that's what most people hold. Like I'm just bringing up the
I'm
point.
saying it's for. I'm about to myself anymore.
No, you're right. That's what most you work for an American hashgacha. And that's what they do. That's what we do.
You work for a living.
That's what we do. But there is this other way of looking at it.
I look at so many men.
Okay.